Have you noticed some unhealthy habits creeping in over the last few weeks now that you have more time in the house, more stress, and less opportunity to go out and do the things you enjoy? Today we have parenting and family psychology expert and the founder of the Triple P Positive Parenting Program, Professor Matt Sanders, and Dr. Jason Coates with us to share some great tips for catching those unhelpful ways of coping with stress and making changes so you can develop more healthy habits.
We've been trying to exercise throughout this, but I know we're eating more and I can feel the effects. We're also drinking more. Probably not good.
I was in quarantine for 2 weeks and all I did was watch TV and snack.
With all the stress that's happening right now and everyone living in a pretty disrupted world, their routines are not what they have been in the past. It's easy for us to slip into unhelpful ways of coping with stress. And I think one of the things that's important to remember is that these patterns of coping can easily become habits that can cause a problem for us in the long run. Let me just give you a couple of examples of how this can be. For example, just spending so much time watching screens, watching TV, playing games, being on social media, doing online shopping, or even gambling. We can spend an awful lot of time in a day involved in that kind of activity. Another thing that sometimes becomes a problem for people under a lot of stress is their eating patterns really change, so that they're snacking an awful lot and eating really unhealthy, sugary, fatty foods that are not normally part of their diet, but because they're under stress, they're relying on it more and more. And then another example would be just having way too much coffee, having alcohol on many more days of the week than you might normally, so that you're relying on alcohol to relax and calm down. You're smoking more cigarettes, you're taking more medication maybe to get to sleep or deal with that painful back. Now, some of the signs that these patterns of behaviour are becoming a problem habit include things like doing way too much of it than you really want to, and having made an effort to change it, but you know you can't do it. You seem to be really stuck, not being able to turn things around. Another thing that can happen is that it just is interfering with your responsibilities, whether they're at home, whether they're at work. Or you might be finding it's actually starting to impact negatively on your relationships. Now, becoming aware that unhelpful habits can affect your parenting is also very, very important at times like this, because some of these unhelpful habits just make us much less tuned in or attentive to our kids. We just don't notice what they're doing. And when we don't notice what they're doing, it's so much easier to be very inconsistent and unpredictable. And when we're under stress, our moods can be affected, and when we're grumpy and irritable and explosive, we can sometimes be lashing out at our kids in ways that we later on regret. It also can be a means by which we're inappropriately modelling ways of coping we actually don't want children to follow. Actions speak a lot louder than words, and so children are watching us all the time.
We're having all these Zoom hookups with friends here and overseas, and it usually involves having a glass of wine, and we wouldn't normally drink in the afternoon.
I always reach for some chocolate when I'm watching a movie after dinner. I'm not hungry, it's just a habit really.
I just checked my phone for screen time and it's over 4 hours a day. It's usually less than 1. I know I've been stuck on Facebook when the girls would like me to spend time with them.
So when you recognise an unhealthy habit is developing and you want to start to turn it around, perhaps, Jason, I could ask you at this point if you can share some basic ideas and tips about what people can do to break it down and to help them figure out how to turn around a habit they're wanting to break.
Yeah, sure thing, Matt. So the first thing you want to do is you really want to know what the triggers are for the habit that you've developed. Now, they can be external triggers or they could be internal. So The external triggers, they could be things like the people that you hang out with, the places you go, the situations you're in, or just general things in your environment. So one thing I've heard a lot lately is that with people working from home, they've got their home office set up in say, the dining area, and they're inside of the fridge or pantry, and they've developed a bit of a habit of snacking a little too often or drinking alcohol during the day, or just a little bit more than they would regularly. Now, the trick for managing these external triggers is just to make them less obvious or avoid them completely. So for those who've got their desk facing the fridge, turn your desk around or set your office up in another room. As the saying goes, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Triggers can also be internal experiences like thoughts and feelings. Unhelpful habits are often efforts to avoid these unpleasant sensations like boredom, sadness, loneliness, or stress. Now, if we act on autopilot without taking the time to listen to our emotions, we don't really resolve the cause of them. So the next time you feel the pull of your habit, take a moment to listen to what your emotions are telling you. So if you notice that you're feeling stressed, use that as an opportunity to plan some self-care activities to look after yourself. Or if you notice you're feeling lonely, then do something that helps you feel more connected to others. You could write a letter to your friend. You don't even have to send it. Or you could call them.
So these are ways of kind of preventing these habits getting right out of control in a lot of ways, aren't they? But so what's the next step involved?
So the next step after being able to notice your triggers and plan for them is to really know what that habit response is. So ask yourself, what are all the small steps that it takes for you to complete your habit? Then write them all down. And as you read through your list, you'll be able to spot all these tiny moments where you could make it more difficult for yourself to follow through with the habit. It's surprising what you'll find, even with something which seems as immediate as checking your phone. A lot of people have this almost compulsive habit of checking their phone all the time these days. You could turn your phone off, put it out of sight, put it in a different room at step one. With regard to unlocking your phone, you can make that more difficult. So instead of it being unlocked by face recognition, you have to put in a password every time. You could log out of all of your social media accounts every time you use them. None of these strategies are going to stop you checking your phone, but it makes the habit a little bit more difficult to follow through with, and then makes it a lot easier to break.
Yeah, so when they're much harder to do, you've got a better chance of kind of trying to turn it around. And what about the third step?
So the third step is to really know about what the outcome of your habit is. So unhelpful habits usually have a strong short-term reward, like helping you feel relaxed or distracting you from unpleasant emotions. The trouble is these habits usually make things worse in the longer term. One strategy for overcoming the temptations of short-term rewards is to remind ourselves of the long-term consequences of the unhelpful habit and the benefits of changing it. So I'd really encourage people to take a moment to write down all of those things which you find undesirable about the habit and all the benefits if you were to change it. And when you've written it down, the next time you're tempted by your unhelpful habit, you'll be able to have a read through it and it will really reinforce your motivation.
I always have good intentions, but I end up slipping into old routines, and I've eaten all the chocolate and chips without even noticing.
So if you're really wanting to change a habit and you're focused on it, you've decided to set yourself a goal and now you're writing it down, perhaps if you could just review for us, Jason, what the key steps are going to be.
The really important thing that you're doing there is that you are writing it down. Once you get out of your head, it becomes real and you're making a commitment to it. It's easy to kind of keep shifting the boundaries, but once it's written down, for some reason, it's a lot more real to us. Put that wherever you've written it, in a spot where you can see it regularly. I like to stick mine on my fridge. Now, when you do write down your goal, try to be as specific as you can. If it's a bit vague or too far in the future, then break it into much smaller steps. You want to see these little, small, achievable steps along the way. Once you've done all those things, I recommend having a chat to someone about it. They don't have to keep you accountable, but just tell someone what you're trying to do, and that'll really enhance your motivation as well. I'd also recommend doing it in a time-based manner. So have dates, have a start date and have review dates. When you do it that way, if you do crash into any barriers as you go along, things don't go according to plan, when you hit that review date, then you can use that time to sort of take stock, figure out how to do it a little bit differently next time. As you track each day as you go along. I'd tick it off somewhere. Have something like a calendar on the wall. Tick off every day you follow through with your behavior. Just seeing something as simple as a little calendar on the wall can be really powerful for a lot of us.
Absolutely. So if we start thinking about what we can do to turn around unhelpful ways of coping, particularly during challenging times like these, it's also a pretty good time to just be thinking about how all of these kind of behaviours and habits can be affecting our parenting, and what, if anything, we want to do about this. If we're aware of our triggers and what our unhelpful responses are, we actually can start to do things differently and try out a new way, a new healthier way of coping with stress that doesn't involve these negative effects on our parenting or on our children.
That's all for this episode of Parenting in a Pandemic. Here are some tips for catching those unhelpful coping strategies that can become habits. Tip number 1, notice when you are resorting to something to help you cope that's not actually healthy or has an impact on what you want to do, your relationships, or other areas of your life. Tip number 2, think about the triggers, all the steps of the habit and the outcomes so you can find that motivation for change. Tip number 3, when you do make a commitment to change, set a specific goal, write it down, tell someone, and then track how you're going. And tip number 4, there'll be setbacks, so keep at it and feel good about the changes you're making. Thanks for listening to Parenting in a Pandemic. If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a review. It'll help others to find this series. You can find free COVID-19 Parenting in a Pandemic resources in the episode show notes to help you on this journey.